Welcome back to Second Gear Low. On today's episode, I'm going to show you how to replace the spark plugs on the 100 series Landcruiser. Now this one's got the 2UZ FE V8 petrol engine in it, which is common in the Tundra, Sequoia and 4Runner Toyota models. Also the Lexus GX and LX470s. Now you want to do these every 100,000 Ks or 60,000 miles or every 5 years, whichever comes first. So let's jump into it. There's a few basic tools and parts you're going to need to do this job. Grab yourself a torque wrench, a socket wrench with an extension, and a 10mm socket. You're going to want a spark plug socket that's 5/8 or 16mm, and this is the type that has the rubber inside which grabs onto the spark plug, a flathead screwdriver, a bit of paper towel, and some gloves. Now the spark plugs that we're going to be installing are these ones here, and that's the Toyota part number. They are actually a Denso spark plug, but you can get an NGK option as well. As always, make sure you chock your wheels before you work on your car. So before we get started, there's a few things we need to remove from the top of the engine. Now the first one is this engine cover here, and it's held on by 4 bolts at the top, and it uses a 10mm socket. Once you've loosened those, you need to actually pop your engine oil cover off, and that'll leave this free to move, but there is a clip on the back side here that just holds a hose as well, so you just want to disconnect that. And you want to make sure to put your oil filler cap back on. Next up, we're going to remove the air intake tubing, and I'm going to start with this little clamp here. So that uses a 10mm socket. Now that that's loose, I'm going to remove some of the hoses at the back here. So these are the 3 that I'm going to remove. So now we need to remove these 2 bolts with a 10mm socket. Now you can see that mine has broken up here, but I'm just going to remove it for the sake of the video. While we're here, we're also going to remove this MAF sensor plug. So you do that just by pushing down on the end and pulling outwards. Now there's one more hose to remove from the front side, which is this small one here. So just pinch these little tabs together and push the clip out of the way. Then you should be able to just pull that hose off. And then finally, there's 3 clips on the top of the airbox. Once all that's loose, we can lift it up and out of the way. So that now gives you nice access to the left-hand side of the engine bay and to the top of the coils. To remove these, it's got a 10mm bolt here and a plug, and there's 4 of them. So to get this plug off, you just need to push the top in and pull upwards. Now we did find that it can help to use a little flathead screwdriver to help get that plug off. Just be nice and gentle with it. You don't want to put too much force because you can crack the plastic. So we're going to remove all 4 of those plugs first. Now before we go any further and remove the ignition coils, it's a good idea to just blow out this area with a bit of compressed air, or even just get a little brush just to make sure that none of that debris falls into your engine once you remove these. So we'll start by removing this first one, and again, 10mm socket. Now you'll notice that these coil packs have this little rubber boot. You want to make sure that that comes with it because we need to make sure it goes back in like that. Now that gives us access to our spark plug. So you want a spark plug socket that's a 5/8 or 16mm. You want to make sure you use a spark plug socket because it does have that rubber boot inside. The rubber sits in there and basically grabs around the top here to help you pull the spark plug. Now that spark plug doesn't look too bad, but I'm going to replace mine as a bit of preventative maintenance. So now we're going to grab a new spark plug, and that's the number there from Toyota. They actually come as a Denso spark plug, and these ones are iridium. Now Denso themselves actually recommend not to gap them. They do come pre-gapped to 1.1mm, and the reason they don't recommend doing it is because you can damage that little electrode in the top there if you try and gap them. So then we're going to grab the new one and put it into our spark plug socket, and we're going to gently start it off by hand to make sure that we don't cross-thread it. Now you should properly torque down your spark plugs because they do have a crush gasket on them. The correct spec is 13 foot-pounds or 17.5 Newton meters. Before I reinstall my ignition coil assembly, I like to just check that there's no cracks along this section here, and that the rubber at the end is still nice and supple. If you've got any cracks, it's a good idea to get these replaced. I also like to tidy up and make sure that I put this gasket back on. If you do find you need to replace one of your ignition coils, it's the same part number for all 8. Now I can slide these back in over the top of the spark plug. Then you can reinstall the 10mm bolt. There is a torque spec for this bolt. It's 5.5 foot-pounds or 7.5 Newton meters, but we're just going to snug it down. Then finally, we can grab our clip and plug that back in. Make sure you hear that click when you pop that clip back on. Now that we've done this one, we're going to repeat the exact same process on these 3. And here's a good example. So this seal has stuck to the engine, so make sure you remove that and reinstall it on your ignition coil later. If you've made it this far through the video and you feel like we've helped you, please consider subscribing, as it really does mean a lot for the channel and it helps us create more content just like this. So on the right hand side of the engine now, you can see the top of the spark plugs here. The other 2 are located behind this bracket, and it's a lot easier to get to them if you remove this. So you need to just unclip a few hoses and 2 10mm bolts that are located here and here. So we're going to do that now. You'll notice on the bottom of the bracket this wiring loom, that one comes off really easily from this clip. You just need to lift up on this little tab and pull up. So there's one on this side and one towards the back. So that bracket will now be free, and I'll just remove that and put it off to the side. So now you've got much clearer access to the back 2 spark plugs. So we're going to start from the front now and work our way back. So it's the same process as the other side. You're going to remove this clip and then undo this 10mm bolt. It can be a good idea to inspect each spark plug around the tip here, just to see if there's any oil on it. If you do have oil there, it could indicate that the seals within that cylinder are starting to perish. So now we can pop a new spark plug back in. Again, I'm just going to do it finger tight to start with, to make sure that I don't strip that thread. And then I'll come and torque that one down with 13 foot-pounds or 17.5 Newton meters. Then I can grab that 10mm bolt and put it back in. And the torque spec for that is 5.5 foot-pounds or 7.5 Newton meters, but I'm just going to snug that one down. Finally, we can grab that clip and pop it back in. Remember that you want to hear that little click as that little tab goes over the ridge. So we've done the first one. I'm just going to repeat the exact same process for the remaining 3. Now we can reinstall that bracket. So you just need to feed it around those hoses and cables. And that goes back in with the short 10mm bolts. Now it's pretty obvious at this point what clicks into what, but this hose here goes into this little white clip. And then this wiring harness goes on these 2 clips at the bottom of the bracket. This is the hose that I mentioned at the start that gets unclipped from the back corner of the engine cover. So we'll reinstate that later. So I'm just going to snug those 2 10mm bolts down with a 10mm socket. So then I can reinstate the air intake. So this front part needs to go over this lip, and then I can tighten that clamp with a 10mm socket. Then I'm going to reinstate the 2 10mm bolts at the back. Those you can just snug down. Then the 3 hoses on this side of the air intake. The hose at the front here, 3 clips on the airbox, and finally your MAF plug up here. So now before we put that last cover back on, we're just going to start the car and make sure that it's all running okay. If you haven't installed one of the spark plugs correctly, it'll misfire, and you can sort of feel and hear that. So we'll give that a go now. I'm happy with how that's running, so I'm going to reinstate that engine cover. Remember that you do need to undo this. Then I'm going to reinstate the 2 bolts at the front and the 2 nuts at the back. I'm just going to snug these down with a 10mm socket. So that wraps up the spark plug change on the 2UZ FE. We've got plenty more videos on the 100 series and way more to come, so check out our channel and follow us on Insta for a bit of behind the scenes action. See you next time.